Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road. Today is part one of a two-part series with Dianna Parish Crumpacker, and she has an amazing story of addiction and restoration. I'm reminded of what Paul writes in Romans 6:13 and 14. He says to yield yourselves to God, and sin may no longer have mastery over you. I would ask you today, as you listen to part one of Dianna's story, is there any addiction in your life? Is there any sin that has mastery over you? And is it time to yield yourself to God? Dianna, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. I want to pick up your story growing up as a little girl. But first, I want everybody to know what you do. Can you tell us what you do as a vocation right now?
I'm actually a ministry leader with Celebrate Recovery, and I bring Celebrate Recovery into transitional homes in the downtown Fort Wayne area.
So, I mean, that in itself is so powerful, but we're going to see how God brought you to that point.
Right.
Can you talk about growing up as a little girl and your first exposure to faith?
My first exposure to church and faith was in the third grade, and prior to that, there had been no church. A neighbor asked my mom if she wanted to go to church, and my mom said yes, and my first reaction was, church, what's that? And we went, and my dad was asked to go, and he declined. So the three of us kids went with my mom, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with this. This was the most awesome thing ever. And why didn't we do this on Sunday mornings before? We became very intrigued by this church, this God thing, very quickly. And it wasn't very long into it. This was third grade. It wasn't very long into it before there was an invitation to ask Christ into your heart, and I was like all in. I want this. And it was actually my Sunday school teacher did that and prayed with me, and I was like so excited. It was like, this is some newfound joy. We stayed involved in church for forever. That was like day one of the rest of it. And my dad never really went. It was very apparent that he wanted no part of it. And then, I don't know, we were a year or two into it. He just like appeared out in the garage and with a Bible that my mom had bought him that sat on the shelf, and picked up his Bible, opened his door, picked up his Bible, and flung it on the dash.
As if he was going to go to church to appease your mom,
got
kind of
in
thing?
there, and we're all sitting there, and nobody wants to say a word because we're like, Dad's going to church. So, and Dad went from there on out every Sunday morning, opening that car door and flinging his Bible on the dash, and we went to church. And
did that affect your dad at all in how he interacted with you kids and your mom?
It absolutely did. You know, when Sunday mornings came and we went to church and Dad stayed at home, there was just this, I don't know how else to describe it other than this this mood. You know, we were doing something and he was being left behind. And even when he started going to church, he never sang. He never participated. He very obviously did not want to be there. I remember even when I was baptized, my sister and I were actually baptized together. And
how old, roughly?
I probably was 10, maybe 11. She was 2 years younger. And we just were baptized on the same Sunday. And I remember my dad, he was there. had no emotion, nothing. When the church thing started, he just, there was this tension in the house, this tension between my mom and him. And, you know, because she was going every Sunday, she was going on Wednesday night. She was just all in. She started teaching Sunday school. I mean, very 100% in. And I think my dad, you know, I think looking back, I think he felt left out. He felt like he lost his role as head of house. You know, I think some of that was there. It was just tense. I don't know how else to describe that. It was just very tense. The time that he spent with us when he got home from work was always like the best part of the day growing up until we started church. And then it was, you know, Dad, you want to play? No, I'm busy, I'm tired. Dad, come on, let's go play. No, I'm busy, I'm tired. There was a lot of 7 days a week working on his part. Now, whether that was voluntary or whether that's just what he did, I don't know.
Now, your mom, was she raised by alcoholic parents?
Yes, my mom was actually, I did not find this out until I was probably a young teenager. Found out that my mom had actually been in an orphanage from age 5 to 13, along with her 3 brothers. Both of her parents died alcoholic-related deaths. Her mom died when she was, I believe, 4.
Oh, my.
And her dad died when she was 5, or vice versa. I can't remember which one went first, all due to alcohol.
And how do you think that affected her raising you guys?
I don't think, even though, you know, she was adopted out when she was 13, just her, not the brothers. I think that the people that adopted her, I think that grandmother on that side, I believe that she gave it her all, and she was a good mom and she was a good grandma. But I think there was just so much missing.
Was there a time when your mom was begging and scavenging for food? Was that?
Yes, yeah. She told me stories of them eating out of dumpsters, and apparently they weren't put in an orphanage right away.
So that was survival until
they were in survival mode. And she was 5, and she said that she can remember going out and digging in dumpsters and begging from neighbors. And you know, at that time, you know, we didn't have, you know, Child Protective Services stepping in necessarily. Neighbors knew what was going on. Neighbors would a lot of times bring them cookies, and then they would, like, save them because they didn't want to eat them all at the same time because they didn't know what they were going to have later. 2 days from now. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that whole childhood has affected my mom tremendously.
Well, you get into high school, and is that the beginning of you experimenting with boys, vices?
High school was not, I hated high school. I absolutely hated it. I barely survived it. I had next to failing grades all through high school. I couldn't wait for it to end. It was never fitting in, never being good enough. We went to school many times. There was money for things, but my parents lived very frivolous. You know, we just didn't get new things. So yeah, high school was a struggle. I don't know that so much in high school I experimented. I think there was a little bit of it. It was after high school.
That's when you started drinking,
that was
smoking
when,
pot?
yes. That was, you know, my sister and I both were into the alcohol and the weed. And she did it first, actually. She was younger, but she did it first. And I can remember many, many nights listening to her and my dad go around about where she'd been and why she smelled like alcohol, and what's this new dent in your car and all this. I can remember many nights like that. But my alcohol use actually started surely right after high school. I moved out right after I graduated.
It's like something like 3 days after
Yep,
graduation.
3 days after
you move out.
graduation, I moved out.
And you're feeling at that point different about church, I guess, too? A little disenchanted with it?
Yes, I think I got put on a back burner. It wasn't important. It was more important for me to prove that I could do this by myself. And I didn't need parental guidance. I didn't need church 3 times a week. I could do it on my own.
So you get a job and you start
I had a job.
parting the money away?
Yeah, pretty much. That apartment lasted a few months. I never had money for rent. Landlords don't look kindly to that. And I moved back home.
But you continue to party, right? And that didn't go over very well with your dad?
I actually moved back home a few times, and each time I did it, I had to pay rent and follow the rules. And as far as they knew, I did. But I was just slick. I was just slick.
And then do you eventually get caught and they kick you out?
Yes, I did. After about the third time moving back home, I knew my mom was going through my things, and when I was at work, I knew she was. She had done that, always done that. And I had always told them I was working overtime or working double shifts, and that's not what I was doing. I was just drunk and high. Couldn't make it home. And I remember coming home one morning. I want to say it was a weekend. I even want to say maybe it was a Sunday. And I came home, and it was late morning, early afternoon, and I pulled in and parked, stumbled out of my car, and looked over, and all my stuff was sitting in the front yard. Everything. It literally looked like they took my dresser drawers outside and poured them in the yard. Everything. Not bagged it, not boxed it, threw it in the yard. And as I got up to the house, my dad met me and said that I was no longer welcome there. And there were some explicit words used, and you will always be a pothead. Get out.
Are you high or drunk at that time? Are you sober? And I'm trying to gauge the weight of the words at that time. It seems like they were.
I don't know that I was drunk or high when I pulled in. I definitely was hungover.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I know I was hungover. And I just remember when I saw my stuff in the yard, I don't ever remember a time getting completely sober so fast. It was a huge reality. And I remember I was just like, oh my God, my life is over as I know it. I am busted. This is it.
So what'd you do? Where'd you go?
Well, at the time, I picked up all these handfuls of clothes and threw them in the car. And at the time, I was working at a hotel in Fort Wayne, and I drove to work and went to my boss and said, this is what has happened. And of course, she, believe me, she felt bad, and she let me stay. I stayed in actually a back room for a few weeks.
Wow.
Until I could find some place to live.
And finding some place to live, does that begin the pattern of living with different guys over a period of time?
Yes. Yes.
And would those relationships center around partying? Is that kind of how you would go from one to the other?
Yeah, yes and no. It was, I spent nights alone, and I spent nights with different guys. If I could find somebody to buy my drinks and to pay for my weed, that was the ticket. Because I did have rent to pay. And I did have groceries to buy at times. I can remember many, many weeks living on peanut butter and bread. Peanut butter and bread.
Wow.
Yeah,
You finally land, I think, a really good job at Magnavox, right?
I do.
And can you describe the car you were driving at that time?
I was driving by this time, my parents and I were somewhat on speaking terms. We went a few years and things were very, very strained. I would show up at holidays and then just show up and leave. It was bad. Um, I did have enough respect to not show up intoxicated, you know. Um, but yes, I had a car a little Mazda, that you could basically see the pavement while you were driving.
Like the Flintstones.
Pretty much. You had certain places you could put your feet and certain places you couldn't put your feet. But that was my car. It got me from point A to point B,
And
and that's all that mattered.
I think you had a thought. You were partying and then sober, you're working, you got the holes in the floorboard, and you have a thought that comes to your mind. Do you remember that? Is this how life is always going to be?
Yes, and I'd had every car I had to that point was a point A to point B vehicle, rusted out. Many times you could see the highway. And I did. I thought, gosh, this is it. This is what my life is going to be, And and I would clean up for a while and I would get back in church and then I would slowly, be tired of being by myself. And I would pick up, somebody would say a kind thing and I was all over it. It was like, they must care because they just bought me 10 drinks. They must care because they just took me home. Yeah, this went on for a lot.
It kind of reminds me of something we write about in Restoration Road in the book, that we have stone hearts or sand hearts. Stone is hard, rigid, legalistic. A sand heart is loose and licentious, and it blows in the wind. And it's a little bit like you're going back and forth from a stone heart to a sand heart, back to a stone heart in order to find self-restoration.
Yes.
But God wants us to have a clay heart, one that's malleable in his hands, which we're going to get to. But one thing I find so interesting, I think you're around 32 years old and you meet a guy through the personal ads.
Yes. Yes, I met somebody through the personal ads. And, one of my things that my parents, as strange as our relationship was, is, my sister and I never could seem to bring home good guys. They would always be long-haired, trashy types. Never had a job, always looked like they just crawled out of bed. Their cars were worse than ours, and they were users. And I met this guy through the personals, and I had actually sent out almost a dozen letters. And that was back when, the personal ads were the big thing.
Uh-huh.
And I sent out letters, and I met with, I believe, maybe 5 or 6. And I met this guy.
Prospective men
That I would go out with,
uh-huh.
yeah. And I was smart enough to be safe about it. I always had my backup, my out.
Mm-hmm.
But I met this guy, and actually didn't even meet him in person. We talked on the phone. We talked on the phone for hours, for weeks.
So you're emotionally connecting through that.
Yeah, emotionally, I'm thinking, this guy's okay. And he's a single dad, and he's got 3 young sons, and comes from a Christian family. He just seems like he's really got it together. And
More so than all the other guys you've been with.
way more so. And his car is good. His car is real good. I don't see the highway on the bottom, and it's clean and it's nice and it's better than my parents' vehicles. And I decided we met and we had dinner, and the first thing I remember saying to him is, "Are you a narc?" Because he looked like a narc, and he's like, "No," but I worked down. He worked for the corrections.
So he had a little bit of that officer
He did. He looked,
vibe.
I thought he was a cop. And he kept saying, no, I'm not, no, I'm not. And we met and dated a lot. I mean, we were on the phone with each other every night, learning about everybody's background. Although I left out most of mine, you know. I actually introduced him to my parents one weekend after we'd had dinner, and we drove, and and the first thing they said was, their faces said it all. Where did you get him? And I didn't tell them. I didn't tell them the personals. I just
He's much more clean cut than they had ever
Oh,
seen
very
you with
clean
before. Yeah.
cut. He's wearing a yeah, yeah, he's very clean cut. He's got shirt and tie and dress coat, and he looks nice. His hair's all cut, and he's shaven, and they were very impressed with him, and they were very impressed with everything they saw about him.
And then how long was it before you decided to get married?
Well, we actually, I moved in with him, and they had a little bit of an issue with that. And I just kept saying, well, you know, it's okay. It's okay. And they're like, well, that's living in sin. And I go, I did it anyway. And we lived together for actually 3 years and 3 days until we got married.
And then somewhere in that time period, you reintroduce yourself and your life to drugs and alcohol at a very high level?
Yes. While we were living together, I started seeing a lot of things that I wasn't sure about. One of them was, you know, during that time that we were dating, we drank casually, but very little. The weed was kind of a thing of the past. I was too involved in this relationship and building this relationship and getting to know his sons and caring for his sons. His sons were 8, 7, and 1. And, you know, he was doing the single dad thing. I was trying to get my life back, you know, on track. And, you know, I ignored a lot of the things that I saw. The weed, he was very big into porn. I soon found out he was very big into a lot of sadistic acts in the bedroom. Just some things like that. But then he had the great side. You know, he had a really good job. We always drove really nice vehicles. You know, all of that was very appealing to me. I'd never had that before. And so I kind of dismissed all those things. You know, I saw some things, sadistic type behavior with his sons as his sons grew up, and, you know, they started to butt heads as teenagers. I dismissed it all and thought, but he's still a good guy.
And I think you have, the boys are 4 and 6, and you thought you would leave then?
Yes,
but you didn't leave.
We actually got married, and we got married with the understanding that there would be no more children, that he'd already had his 3, and that was what we were going to have as children. And a couple years into the marriage, I decided that I really wanted my own kids. And there'd been some conflicts with being a stepmom, and I really wanted my own kids.
I gotta ask you a question. You're seeing the things you described while you're living together, so you get married with probably a question mark in your mind,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Okay.
I can remember, I have a wedding picture of standing there crying. And our photographer caught it it was a perfect, I still have that photo to this day. And I remember people asking me, why are you crying like that? And I had my hand to my face, and I said, because I knew I screwed up. I knew I was screwing up. And what do? You know, there was big question there. But, you know, the flip side is, you know, my clock's ticking away and this is probably the best it's going to be. So I got to make the best of this. And I have to say, things were not horrible. We have good things. We have good things. And 2 years in, we had two sons together. 2 years in, I had the first one, and for the first time in my life, recognized what a mother's love really was.
Do you stop alcohol and drugs during the pregnancies?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I got pregnant, the weed, it was just like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. We're not doing this. And I especially can't do it while I'm pregnant. That was a little bit of contention because he still kept it. And he would just go do it with somebody else. But things weren't horrible, you know, horrible enough that we had a second son. So the first one would have a playmate. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was a good dad. I have to say he was a decent dad to the boys at the beginning. At the beginning.
So you think the tension's high enough when they're about, the boys are about 4 and 6, that you think you ought to leave, but you wait until they're closer to 7th and 9th grade?
When the boys were 4 and 6, there were some things I started seeing with his sadistic manner that were concerning me. And there was a time where some of his discipline, especially with the older one, was a little off base. And, you know, I think when you watch it being done to your stepchildren, it's bad. But when it's your own child you see him doing stuff to, it's like, that's so not cool. That's so not cool. And my firstborn was, my boys are very different. My first one, my oldest one, is got a very, very soft heart, got a very kind heart. And I was watching his spirit be broken. And it was almost a game to see how far he could push that boy to get him to cry.